I arrived at my wife's firm's launch, finding everyone laughing, pointing. "The test-run husband is here." My wife then gave me papers. "This firm's first case is our divorce, sign and go." So I quietly left, voiding all payments, parties, trips, and withdrew my $20 million firm investment. Moments later, my phone blazed with 456 missed calls, and a knock came at my door. You know, sometimes the person you think you know best, the one you've poured your entire soul into, is actually just waiting for the perfect moment to stab you in the back. What if everything you thought was real, every promise, every shared dream, was nothing but an elaborate lie, designed to publicly destroy you? That's my story. It's about how I went from building an empire with the woman I loved, to watching her tear it all down, right in front of my face, while she called me her test-run husband. And trust me, you won't believe what happened next. I came into this world on a freezing January morning in Millbrook, Ohio. It was a tough place, all factory smokestacks and families just barely scraping by. My dad worked himself to the bone at the steel mill, coming home every night with hands permanently stained black, his back getting a little more hunched with each year. My mom cleaned houses for the hill people, you know, the ones with the big columns, circular driveways, and hedges trimmed perfectly. I was the youngest of 3 boys, and from my earliest memories, I understood one thing: money wasn't just scarce, it was a gatekeeper. It decided if you ate name-brand cereal, or the cheap stuff that came in bags, if you got new shoes or hand-me-downs with cardboard to cover the holes. Our 2-bedroom house was more rust than paint, winter winds whistled through the window gaps, and summer turned the upstairs into an oven. There was a crack in the bathroom mirror that made everyone look broken, and our kitchen table wobbled like it had one leg shorter than the others. But despite the poverty, despite the constant struggle, my parents taught me something more valuable than any amount of money. Dignity wasn't about what you owned, but how you carried yourself. Respect wasn't inherited, it was earned. And if you wanted something badly enough, if you were willing to work harder than anyone else, you could change your whole damn story. I was only 7 when I started my first business, and calling it that is probably generous. I collected bottles and cans. From neighbors, from ditches along the highway, from behind restaurants. Entire Saturdays spent filling garbage bags, my small hands sticky with old soda, my shoes soaked from drainage ditches. I dragged those heavy bags to the recycling center in a beat-up red radio flyer, the one with the squeaky wheel that had belonged to my oldest brother. I'd stand on my tiptoes, pouring cans into the machine, watching the counter tick up penny by penny, the attendants always smiling at my determination. Most kids my age were playing. I was collecting cans. By the end of that first summer, I had saved $83. I kept it in a coffee can, hidden under my bed, checking it every night like a dragon guarding treasure. My mom cried when I used that money to buy groceries one week, after my dad's hours had been cut. I pretended not to notice her tears, but something settled deep in my chest that day. A knowledge that money wasn't just paper and coins. It was freedom, security, the ability to help the people you loved. I swore to myself then and there, I would never be poor again. I would climb out of the hole circumstances had dug for my family. School was a mixed bag for me. Numbers just clicked. I could see patterns, solutions, while other kids were still counting on their fingers. My teachers saw a mind built for logic, for problem solving, able to break down complex information. But reading? That was a battle. Words swam on the page, letters flipped around until I just wanted to throw the book across the room. It wasn't until 3rd grade that a patient teacher, Mrs. Henderson, realized I had dyslexia. She started working with me after school, teaching me strategies, colored overlays, finger tracking, how to be patient with my brain instead of angry at it. 3 days a week, I'd stay late with her, missing the bus, walking 2 miles home in whatever Ohio weather threw at me. But I didn't complain. I understood that education was a ladder, and I intended to climb every single rung, no matter how much my hands ached from holding on. By 5th grade, I was reading at grade level. By 7th, I was above it. I devoured books, about business, about success, about people who started with nothing and built empires. Stories about failures that became stepping stones, setbacks that became setups for comebacks. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Oprah, Warren Buffett. Immigrants who came here with empty pockets and determination that couldn't be measured. Each story fueled a fire inside me, an absolute certainty that I wouldn't live and die in Millbrook. I wouldn't spend 40 years in a factory. I was destined for something more, even if no one else could see it yet. When I was 13, my dad was injured at the mill. A piece of machinery malfunctioned, crushing 3 fingers on his left hand. The company covered the medical bills, but it wasn't enough for the mortgage, the food, everything a family of 5 needed. I watched him try to work with that bandaged hand, wincing in pain every time he gripped something. I saw the worry lines deepen around my mom's eyes as she picked up extra cleaning jobs. That's when I decided, Waiting until I was an adult to make real money was a luxury my family couldn't afford. I started mowing lawns in the wealthy neighborhood where my mom worked. Knocking on doors with a confidence I didn't quite feel, offering to mow, edge, and trim for less than the big companies. Most people said no, but eventually, a woman named Mrs. Patterson took a chance on me, probably more out of pity than belief. I showed up at 6 a.m. that Saturday with a borrowed mower and worked until every blade of grass was perfect, until the edges were sharp enough to cut paper, until her yard looked like something from a magazine. Mrs. Patterson was so impressed, she told her friends, and her friends hired me. By the end of that summer, I had 20 regular clients and was making more money than I ever imagined possible for a 13-year-old. Enough to help with bills, buy my own school clothes, and start saving again in a new coffee can that was quickly becoming too small for my ambitions. High school brought new challenges and new opportunities, and I navigated both with a focus that made me seem older than my years. I kept the lawn business going, expanding into snow removal in winter and gutter cleaning in fall. I built a reputation as the kid who showed up on time, who did exactly what he promised, who treated every job like it mattered, because to me, it did. My grades were good, not perfect, but solid. I joined the math club and business club, spending lunch periods talking to teachers about investment strategies, compound interest, the power of starting young. While my classmates were focused on football games and school dances, I was reading financial books, studying entrepreneurs, teaching myself about real estate and stocks and business models. My notebooks were filled with ideas, plans, calculations, how much I needed to save, how much to invest, what percentage of return would get me where I wanted to go. My brothers thought I was weird. My classmates thought I was boring. I didn't care what they thought, because I could see a future they couldn't even imagine. A life where I wasn't trapped by circumstances, where I made the rules instead of following ones set by people who never wanted anything more than a steady paycheck and a pension. I knew I was different. Knew I wanted things other people didn't even know were possible. And instead of trying to fit in, I leaned into that difference, understanding that normal people got normal results. I was aiming for something far beyond normal. The summer before my senior year, my lawn business had grown so big I couldn't handle it alone. So I hired 2 classmates to help me, paid them fair wages, and taught them my standards, explaining that their work reflected on my reputation, and my reputation was everything. This was my first time managing people, and I learned quickly that leadership wasn't about being bossy, it was about clear communication, setting expectations, giving people the tools to succeed, and recognizing good work. I discovered I was good at seeing people's strengths, positioning them where they could shine, that I had a natural ability to inspire others to care about quality, even when I wasn't watching. These skills would serve me far beyond cutting grass and shoveling snow. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved $32,000. A sum that seemed impossible to my parents, who had never had more than a few hundred in savings their entire lives. My guidance counselor pushed me to apply to colleges, showed me scholarship applications. But I had already decided traditional college wasn't my path. 4 years sitting in classrooms learning theory wasn't what I needed. I wanted to be in the real world, building actual businesses, making actual money, while my peers accumulated debt and degrees that might or might not lead to jobs. This decision disappointed my parents, who had hoped one of their sons would be the first to go to college. But I explained my plan with such clarity and confidence that eventually, they understood. They saw that I had a vision most 18-year-olds couldn't articulate, and they gave me their blessing, even if they didn't fully understand where I was going. My first real business venture started in a rented garage on the outskirts of Millbrook. It was cramped, smelled like motor oil, and the electrical outlets sparked sometimes, but it was only $200 a month, which was all I could afford. I'd spent months researching business models, analyzing what people needed, realistic margins, what could be started with limited capital. I settled on something that seemed almost too simple, flipping furniture. Not fancy antiques, just regular stuff people were throwing away or selling cheap because it was damaged or outdated. Furniture I could repair, refinish, and sell for a profit. I started by driving around on trash days in wealthy neighborhoods, loading dressers, tables, and chairs with broken legs or scratched surfaces into a truck I bought for $1,500. It was more rust than metal, but it ran well enough. I taught myself furniture repair through YouTube videos and library books, how to strip old paint, fix broken joints, replace hardware, refinish wood until it glowed like new. My garage became a workshop, sandpaper, stain, polyurethane, clamps, wood glue, furniture in various states of transformation. I'd work from early morning until late at night, my hands covered in sawdust, my lungs filled with the smell of varnish, completely focused on turning trash into treasure. The first piece I sold was a dining table I'd found on the curb. A solid oak table that had once been beautiful but was covered in scratches, water rings, and had a wobbly leg. I spent 2 weeks on that table, stripping it, sanding it smooth, repairing the leg, applying new stain and multiple coats of protective finish. When I was done, it looked like something from a high-end furniture store, something that should cost thousands. I listed it online for $400, holding my breath, hoping someone would see the value. It sold within 6 hours to a young couple furnishing their first house. They were thrilled with the quality and the price. And I was thrilled with the profit. I'd invested maybe $50 in materials and a lot of sweat, and it returned $400. This was the proof of concept I needed. The confirmation that my business model worked. I immediately scaled up, finding more furniture, working faster, improving my techniques, learning what styles sold quickly. Within 3 months, I was making more money than most adults in Millbrook. Within 6 months, I hired my first employee, a retired carpenter named Frank, who taught me advanced techniques, helped increase production, and treated the young entrepreneur with respect most people reserved for those twice his age. But I wasn't content to just flip furniture forever. I wasn't satisfied with a business that required my constant physical labor, that would always be limited by how many hours I could work, how many pieces I could personally restore. I started thinking about scalability, about how to build something that could grow beyond me. And I realized the real opportunity wasn't in doing the work myself, but in creating a system where others did the work. I started hiring more people, training them in my methods, setting up multiple workstations in a larger warehouse. I created an assembly line approach where each person specialized, one for pickup and delivery, another for repairs, another for refinishing, another for photography and listings. I would oversee everything, ensuring quality and managing the business side. This shift, from worker to manager, from technician to entrepreneur, was crucial. It taught me that a business owner's job isn't to do everything, but to build systems and develop people who can do everything. That my highest value wasn't wielding a paintbrush, but making decisions, creating processes, identifying opportunities. The business grew rapidly. We expanded from furniture to include appliances, electronics, anything people threw away that could be repaired and resold. By the time I was 21, I had 15 employees and was clearing $10,000 a month in profit. Most of it went into savings and investments. I still lived in a small apartment and drove my rusty truck, because I understood that money spent on lifestyle was money that couldn't work for me. It was during this rapid growth that I first encountered real estate investing, a world that would eventually make me wealthy beyond anything furniture flipping could achieve. One of my employees, an older man named Roger, who did pickup and delivery, mentioned he owned a few rental properties. Said he made decent money without doing much work, just collecting rent checks and handling occasional maintenance. This fascinated me. It represented the ultimate form of scalability, buying something once, and it generating income month after month, year after year, building wealth while you slept. I started researching real estate with the same intensity one brought to everything else. Reading every book, listening to podcasts during my commute, joining online forums where investors shared strategies and mistakes. I learned about house hacking, the BRR method, creative financing, all the ways people built wealth through property. I learned that real estate was how most millionaires made their money. It provided tax benefits, appreciation, cash flow, leverage. You could control a $300,000 asset with a $60,000 down payment, have tenants pay off the mortgage, while the property increased in value. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that real estate was my path to serious wealth. I started saving aggressively for my first investment property, cutting my already minimal personal expenses even further. Eating ramen, canceling cable I barely watched. Every dollar was sacred, because every dollar was a brick in the empire I was building. My first investment property was a duplex in a working-class neighborhood. It needed significant work but was priced accordingly, listed at $80,000 when similar properties in good condition were selling for $130,000. I put $20,000 down, borrowed the rest, and immediately started renovations. I did much of the work myself to save money, using skills I'd developed flipping furniture, repairing cabinets, refinishing floors. I only hired licensed professionals for plumbing and electrical. I worked on that duplex every evening after managing my furniture business, worked through weekends and holidays, driven by a vision of what it could become, and what it represented for my future. After 3 months and $15,000 in materials and contracted labor, the duplex was transformed. It looked better than it probably had at any point in its 50-year history. Updated kitchens and bathrooms, fresh paint, new carpet, modern fixtures, curb appeal that made it stand out on the block. I rented both units within a week, charging $800 per side, bringing in $1,600 monthly against a mortgage payment of $600. That left me with $1,000 a month in cash flow, after setting aside money for maintenance and vacancies. But the real beauty was this. The property had cost me $35,000 all in, and after renovations, it was worth approximately $130,000. That meant I had created $95,000 in equity, in paper wealth, in net worth. And I still owned the asset, still collected the rent, still benefited from appreciation. This experience was transformative. It opened my eyes to the power of leverage, forced appreciation, strategic value-add investing. I immediately started looking for my next property. Over the next 3 years, I bought 7 more properties, using a combination of cash flow from my furniture business, equity from previous properties through refinancing, and creative financing strategies like seller financing and private money from individuals who wanted better returns than banks offered. I became known in local real estate circles as a young investor who moved fast, closed deals, could evaluate a property quickly, and make competitive offers. I had both the capital and the capability to execute renovations efficiently. Each property was a value-add opportunity, something that needed work but had good bones and was in a decent location. Each one I renovated and rented added to my monthly cash flow and overall net worth. By the time I was 24, I owned 8 rental properties worth over $1 million combined, with enough cash flow to cover all my expenses and then some. I had achieved what few people reach in their entire lives: financial independence. The ability to live without depending on active income. The freedom to choose what I did with my time, because my assets worked for me instead of me working for survival. But I wasn't satisfied with just financial independence. I wasn't content to retire at 24 and live modestly off rental income. My vision was bigger than comfort, bigger than security, bigger than the small-town success that would have made my parents proud. I wanted wealth. Real wealth. The kind that changed lives, created opportunities, made an impact. And I knew that meant continuing to push, continuing to take calculated risks, continuing to build something extraordinary. Then I met Victoria Hayes. It was a rainy Tuesday evening at a coffee shop near the university. An upscale place with exposed brick walls and baristas who took their craft seriously. The kind of place I rarely visited because I saw expensive coffee as an unnecessary luxury. But I was meeting a potential private lender there, someone referred by another investor. I arrived 15 minutes early, because punctuality is a form of respect, and first impressions mattered. I ordered a basic black coffee and sat near the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, reviewing property numbers on my laptop. I was so focused on my spreadsheets that I didn't notice the woman sitting at the next table until she spoke. Her voice cut through my concentration like a bell in a quiet room. She asked if I knew anything about real estate, explaining she couldn't help but notice my screen full of property data, and she was considering buying her first home but felt overwhelmed. When I looked up to answer her, my breath caught. She was stunning. Not just attractive, but luminous. Dark hair that fell past her shoulders, eyes that seemed to hold secrets, and a smile that made the rainy evening suddenly bright. We started talking, and the minutes flew by. My lender meeting completely forgotten. Victoria explained she was in law school at the university, in her second year, already exhausted by the workload, but determined to finish. Determined to become a lawyer because she came from a family where no one had gone to college. She wanted to prove someone from her background could succeed in a profession dominated by privilege. I felt an immediate connection to Victoria, a recognition that we were similar in fundamental ways. Both fighters who refused to accept the limitations of our origins. Both ambitious and driven, willing to sacrifice comfort for future success. She told me about growing up in a small apartment with 3 siblings, a mother who worked 2 jobs, and a father who left when she was young. About getting scholarships and loans to pay for school because her family couldn't help financially. About the pressure of being the hope of her entire family, the one who was supposed to make it, supposed to break the cycle. I shared my own story, Millbrook, the steel mill, collecting cans as a kid, building my business from nothing, teaching myself real estate investing. Victoria listened with an intensity that made me feel seen in a way I rarely experienced. Like she understood not just the words, but the emotions behind them, the hunger, the fear, the determination. We talked for 3 hours that first night, long after my lender had texted to cancel, and the coffee shop staff started giving us looks that suggested they wanted to close. When we finally exchanged numbers and said goodbye, I walked to my truck feeling like something significant had happened. Like I had met someone who could be important, who could be a partner in more than just the romantic sense. I drove home through rain that had softened to mist, thinking about Victoria's laugh, her intelligence, the way she talked about the future with the same certainty I felt. I went to sleep that night with a smile on my face and hope in my chest. Our relationship developed quickly, with an intensity that felt inevitable, rather than rushed. Like 2 rivers always meant to merge. We started meeting regularly at that same coffee shop, comparing schedules packed with obligations. Me managing my businesses and properties, Victoria juggling law school classes, part-time work at a law firm, and study groups that lasted until midnight. But despite our busy lives, we made time for each other, carved out hours that belonged only to us. And those hours became the best part of both our days. I would pick Victoria up after her evening classes, and we'd drive around, looking at properties. I'd point out what made something a good investment, or a bad one. Victoria would ask smart questions that showed she was genuinely interested, not just being polite. She'd invite me to her tiny apartment, and cook dinner while I sat at her kitchen counter, telling her about deals I was working on, problems I was solving. She'd offer perspectives I hadn't considered, play devil's advocate, poke holes in my plans, making me sharper and more thoughtful. We challenged each other, pushed each other, made each other better. The attraction between us was electric. The kind of chemistry that made every touch feel significant, and every kiss feel like a promise. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within 6, we had said, "I love you." And within a year, I was certain Victoria was the person I wanted to build a life with. She was my match in every way that mattered. My friends, the few I had, because I spent most of my time working, warned me I was moving too fast. That a year wasn't long enough to really know someone. That successful people attracted partners who wanted their success, rather than them. But I dismissed these concerns. They came from people who hadn't met Victoria, who hadn't seen how she was with me when there was nothing to gain, who hadn't witnessed her ambition that matched my own. Victoria wasn't impressed by my money or my properties. In fact, she often pushed back when I wanted to spend money on her, insisting on paying her own way, maintaining her independence, not being anyone's charity case or trophy girlfriend. She had her own dreams, her own drive, was building her own future. She talked about being a partner in a relationship, not a dependent, about building something together rather than one person supporting the other. This attitude made me love her more, respect her more, made me believe we could be the power couple I had always imagined. Both successful in our own right, both contributors to a shared empire. I started including Victoria in my business planning, sharing my goals and strategies. She started including me in her career planning, talking about what kind of law she wanted to practice, what kind of firm she wanted to join, and eventually, how she might start her own practice someday. We'd lie in bed late at night, making plans that stretched years into the future. Plans that always included both of us. Plans built on the assumption that we were in this together. That it was Michael and Victoria against the world. I had never felt more certain about anything than I felt about her. When Victoria graduated from law school, finishing in the top 15% of her class despite working part-time and having no family support, I was in the audience, cheering louder than anyone else. Pride swelled in my chest, because I knew how hard she had worked, how many nights she had stayed up studying, how many times she had wanted to quit but pushed through. I had helped where I could, quizzed her before exams, brought her food during study marathons, listened when she needed to vent. But the achievement was hers. The degree was hers. The success was hers. And I never wanted her to forget that. After graduation came the bar exam. 2 months of intensive studying that consumed Victoria completely. I supported her through it, took on extra work so she could focus, made sure she had everything she needed. We celebrated when she passed on the first try. Only 65% of test takers managed that. Victoria accepted a position at a mid-sized firm in the city, an hour commute from where we were living, but it was a good opportunity, with mentorship and a clear path to partnership if she worked hard enough. And though the hours were brutal and the work demanding, Victoria thrived, quickly establishing herself as someone reliable, sharp, and willing to do whatever it took. I watched her transform from a law student to a lawyer, watched her confidence grow, her skills sharpen. And I fell more in love with her success, with her determination, with the woman she was becoming. I never suspected that the same ambition I admired would eventually be turned against me like a weapon I had handed her myself. After 2 years of dating, I decided it was time to propose. Not because I felt pressured by timelines or traditions, but because I couldn't imagine a future that didn't include Victoria. She had become so integral to my life that her absence was unthinkable. I planned an elaborate proposal, renting out the rooftop of a downtown building overlooking the city, arranging for flowers and candles, a photographer to capture the moment. Sparing no expense, because this was the most important question I would ever ask. But when the evening came, and we stood on that rooftop with the city lights spreading out below us like stars fallen to earth, my elaborate plan fell away. I simply dropped to one knee and spoke from my heart. I told Victoria that she was the best thing that had ever happened to me, that she made me want to be better, that I wanted to spend every day of the rest of my life making her as happy as she made me. And I asked her to marry me, my voice shaking with emotion. Victoria said yes, tears streaming down her face. Said yes with a certainty that matched my own. We held each other on that rooftop while the photographer captured images of 2 people who believed they had found forever, who thought they were writing a love story instead of the first chapter of a tragedy. The ring I gave her was substantial, A 2-carat diamond that represented 3 months of my income, as tradition suggested. Victoria gasped when she saw it, told me it was too much. But I insisted, because I wanted the world to know she was claimed, was loved, was valued. I wanted a symbol on her finger that reflected how I felt inside. We set the wedding date for the following spring, wanting time to plan something special, and we threw ourselves into preparations with the same intensity we brought to everything else, excited about the celebration, but more excited about the marriage itself, about officially being partners in every sense, about building our future together. The wedding took place on a perfect April afternoon in a garden venue, with blooming flowers and gentle sunshine. The kind of day that felt like a blessing, like nature itself was celebrating our union. I stood at the altar in a tailored suit, watching Victoria walk down the aisle, and I honestly thought my heart might explode from happiness. From the sheer, overwhelming emotion of seeing the woman I loved moving toward me to promise forever. Her dress was white and flowing and perfect, her smile radiant and real, tears in her eyes that matched the tears in mine. The ceremony was beautiful and personal, with vows we had written ourselves. Words about partnership, and support, and choosing each other every single day. Words that felt sacred and true. Words that everyone witnessing believed came from the depths of our souls. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and we kissed while everyone cheered, I felt complete in a way I never had before. I felt like all the hard work, all the sacrifice, all the years of building had led to this moment, had led to this person, and everything finally made sense. The reception was a celebration that stretched into the night, with dinner and dancing and toasts from friends and family. My parents cried tears of joy, because their youngest son had found love and success. Victoria's mother held my hand and thanked me for loving her daughter so well. Everyone who mattered gathered in one place to witness the joining of two people who seemed destined for extraordinary things together. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, as all first years are. Learning to share space, compromise on decisions, navigate the small irritations that come with constant proximity. But overall, it was happy. Filled with more good moments than bad, more laughter than arguments, more love than frustration. My real estate portfolio continued growing, now 14 properties, with plans to hit 20 by year-end. And my other business ventures were thriving as well, including a property management company I'd started to manage my own rentals, which was now managing properties for other investors too, charging fees and building another income stream. Victoria was excelling at her law firm, taking on bigger cases, more responsibility, getting noticed by partners, building a reputation as someone who prepared meticulously and performed exceptionally. Someone who could be trusted with important clients and complex matters. We bought a house together, a beautiful 4-bedroom in a good neighborhood. Nothing ostentatious, but certainly comfortable. A place we could see raising children someday. We filled it with furniture, and memories, and dreams. We'd sit on our back patio on weekend mornings, drinking coffee and reading the paper. Me reviewing property listings, Victoria reviewing case files. Comfortable in silence, happy in each other's presence. And I would look at her and think how lucky I was, how grateful, how certain I had been right about her, about us, about forever. But there were moments. Small moments that I noticed but dismissed, because I wanted everything to be perfect. Moments when Victoria seemed distant or distracted. When she would snap at me over nothing and then apologize quickly. When she would work late more often than seemed necessary, or take phone calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones. I told myself she was stressed from work. That law firms were demanding, and the partnership track was brutal. That everyone had moods and moments of irritation, and it didn't mean anything fundamental was wrong. Victoria assured me everything was fine when I asked. She'd kiss me, and smile, and tell me not to worry. Say she was just tired, or had a difficult case, or was dealing with firm politics. And I believed her, because I wanted to believe her. Because doubt felt like betrayal. Because questioning my wife felt like admitting my judgment had been wrong. And I had built my entire life on trusting my judgment. So, I pushed the worry down, focused on my businesses, on making more money, on building security for our future. Telling myself that my job was to provide and protect and support. That if Victoria was struggling, the solution was for me to be more successful, to take stress off her by ensuring their financial foundation was rock solid. I worked harder, closed more deals, expanded faster, all in service of a vision where Victoria could eventually stop working if she wanted. Could start her own firm with my backing. Could have every option available because I had built enough wealth to make anything possible. By our second anniversary, my net worth had crossed $5 million. A milestone that seemed surreal to a kid who had once collected cans for nickels. I celebrated by surprising Victoria with a trip to Paris, first-class tickets, a suite at a 5-star hotel, reservations at restaurants where you needed to book months in advance. Victoria seemed thrilled with the surprise. Posted pictures on social media of us in front of the Eiffel Tower, at sidewalk cafes, walking along the Seine. Pictures that showed a happy couple living a dream life. And everyone who saw those pictures thought we were perfect together. Thought we had it all figured out. Thought we were relationship goals. But even during that trip, there were moments. Moments when I caught Victoria looking at me strangely, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between calculation and dissatisfaction. Something that made me uncomfortable, even though I couldn't articulate why. When I asked if something was wrong, she would smile and say everything was perfect. She'd kiss me, hold my hand, and say she was just taking it all in. And I would accept the explanation, because the alternative was terrifying. It was admitting that maybe I didn't know my wife as well as I thought. Maybe there were parts of her she kept hidden. Maybe the person I married was becoming someone else, or had always been someone else, and I was just now seeing it. Victoria started talking more frequently about wanting to start her own law firm. About being tired of working for partners who took most of the profit while she did most of the work. About having her own vision for how a firm should be run. About building something that was hers, rather than climbing a ladder someone else had built. I encouraged this dream. Told her I would support her however she needed, financially, emotionally, practically. Told her that my success was meant to enable her success. That we were partners, and her dreams were my dreams. We started planning in earnest, talking about timelines and budgets and business models. What kind of law she wanted to practice, what kind of clients she wanted to serve. Office space, hiring, marketing, all the million details that go into starting a business. Victoria came alive during these planning sessions in a way I hadn't seen since law school. Animated, excited, full of ideas. And I loved seeing her like this. Loved feeling like I was contributing to something important to her. Loved imagining us both as business owners, both entrepreneurs, both builders of our own empires. I offered to invest in her firm, a substantial amount to get it started right, to skip the struggling startup phase and launch with enough capital to be competitive. And Victoria accepted with what seemed like genuine gratitude, with hugs and kisses and promises that she wouldn't let me down, that this was going to be amazing, that we were going to build something incredible together. Over the next year, I invested increasingly large amounts into Victoria's planned law firm. Money for office space, and furniture, and technology, and hiring, and marketing, and 1,000 other things that apparently cost more than I had anticipated. Victoria handled all the planning. Said she wanted to surprise me with the final result, wanted me to walk in on opening day, and see what she had built. And I trusted her completely. Wrote checks without question. Transferred money whenever she asked, because I believed in her vision and her capability and our partnership. I was busy with my own businesses anyway, acquiring 3 more properties, launching a construction company that handled renovations for my properties and was now taking outside clients. I was happy to let Victoria run her firm startup while I ran my ventures, both of us working toward our individual successes that would combine into our shared success. Victoria's demeanor changed during this period, becoming more confident, and also more distant. She spent long hours allegedly working on firm setup, coming home late and exhausted, sometimes not coming home until the next morning, claiming she had fallen asleep at the office or stayed at a hotel nearby to save commute time. I didn't love this arrangement, but I understood it. I remembered my own early business days, when I practically lived at work, when building something from nothing required everything you had. I supported her even when I missed her, even when our house felt empty, even when I ate dinner alone more often than together, because I believed this was temporary. Believed that once the firm launched, things would normalize. Believed the sacrifice now would lead to happiness later. The invitation came on a Tuesday in October. Delivered to our house in an expensive envelope with embossed lettering. Formal and impressive, like everything Victoria did. It announced the grand opening of Hayes Law Group, Victoria's firm, scheduled for the following Saturday evening. A celebration to mark the official launch and introduce the firm to potential clients, referral sources, and the legal community. I felt a surge of pride reading the invitation, seeing my wife's name in elegant script, knowing that all her hard work, and my financial support, had led to this moment. That she was achieving the dream she had talked about for years. Victoria seemed excited, but also nervous, when we discussed it. Said she wanted everything to be perfect. Said this night would set the tone for the firm's future. Said she had invited everyone who mattered in the local legal world, plus friends and family. Probably 150 people total. I offered to help with planning or setup, but Victoria insisted she had it under control. Said she had hired an event planner, and everything was arranged. Said all I needed to do was show up looking handsome and proud, be the supportive husband celebrating his wife's achievement. I asked what I should wear, and she suggested my best suit, said this was a black tie optional event, so people would be dressed formally. Said she wanted everyone to see us as the power couple we were, successful, sophisticated, impressive. I went shopping for a new suit, picked something expensive and perfectly tailored. I wanted to look like I belonged next to Victoria. I wanted to make her proud the way she made me proud. The week leading up to the opening, Victoria was gone almost entirely. She claimed she was handling last-minute details, meeting with potential clients, making sure everything was perfect. I barely saw her. I'd come home to an empty house and wake up to an empty bed. And while I missed her, I also understood. I remembered my own business launches and how consuming they were, how every detail felt crucial, every decision weighted. I sent her encouraging texts that she responded to with brief thank yous. I tried calling, but she rarely answered. And when she did, she sounded stressed and distracted. Asked me to trust that everything would be worth it, that after Saturday, we could relax and enjoy the success together. I counted down the days, excited to see what Victoria had built, excited to celebrate with her, excited to move past this intense startup phase into something more sustainable and balanced. I imagined walking into the firm with her, meeting the people she had hired, seeing the office space she had designed, shaking hands with potential clients and referral sources, being introduced as Victoria's husband and business partner. Because even though I wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations, my investment made me a partner in her success. My support had made this possible. And I was proud of that. Proud of her. Proud of us. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool and clear, with leaves turning golden red. The kind of day that felt significant, like nature was cooperating with important events. I spent the morning working out and the afternoon getting ready, showering and shaving carefully, putting on my new suit, looking at myself in the mirror and seeing a man who had come far from collecting cans in Millbrook. A man who had built something from nothing. A man whose wife was launching her own law firm, partly because he had made it financially possible. And I felt good. Felt successful. Felt like I had earned my place in the world. Victoria had stayed at a hotel near the office the night before, texted that morning to say she was handling final preparations and would see me at the party. Told me to arrive at 7 o'clock sharp. Said she loved me and couldn't wait to celebrate together. I arrived at the office building at 6:55, always punctual, and stood outside for a moment, looking at the building. Impressive and modern, glass and steel, the kind of place that screams success and professionalism. The building directory showed Hayes Law Group on the 3rd floor. I rode the elevator up, feeling anticipation build in my chest. Excitement about seeing Victoria's vision realized, about celebrating this milestone, about starting the next chapter of our lives together. The elevator doors opened to a hallway with signs directing guests to the Hayes Law Group opening reception. I followed the signs to a set of double doors that were propped open, revealing a large office suite that had been transformed into a party space. The first thing I noticed was how many people were there. The space was packed with well-dressed individuals, holding wine glasses, talking in small groups, the buzz of conversation and laughter filling the air. The second thing I noticed was how expensive everything looked. From the modern furniture visible in the offices, to the elaborate catering setup, to the open bar, to the professionally designed signage and branding materials scattered throughout the space. I had invested a lot of money in this venture, but seeing it all in person made me realize it was even more than I had calculated. A small voice in my head wondered about costs and budgets. But I pushed it aside, because tonight was about celebration, not accounting. I walked into the reception area, looking for Victoria, wanting to find my wife and congratulate her. And that's when I heard it. A voice from somewhere in the crowd that cut through the other noise like a knife. Loud enough to be heard, deliberate in its volume and its cruelty. A voice that said the words that would change everything. "Oh my God, the test-run husband is here. I can't believe she actually invited him. This is going to be hilarious." I stopped walking, the words hitting me like a physical blow. Confusion, shock, and a dawning horror spread through my chest. Test-run husband. What did that even mean? Surely I had misheard. Surely it was about someone else. But then I saw people turning to look at me. Saw smiles that were wrong. Smiles that held mockery, and amusement, and pity. Saw people whispering to each other, pointing in my direction. And the horrible reality began to sink in. They were talking about me. That I was the test-run husband. That somehow, my wife's colleagues and friends knew something I didn't. Something that turned my marriage into a joke they were all in on. I stood frozen in the doorway, feeling exposed and humiliated. Feeling every eye in the room on me, hearing laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to find an explanation that didn't shatter everything I believed about my life and my marriage. Then the crowd parted, and I saw Victoria. My wife. Standing near the center of the room, looking stunning in a red dress that probably cost thousands of dollars. And she was looking directly at me, with an expression that was cold. So cold. Nothing like the woman I had kissed goodbye that morning. Nothing like the woman I had married. Everything about her face and posture communicated distance and disdain. My blood turned to ice, because I suddenly understood that something very bad was about to happen. Something I hadn't seen coming. Something Victoria had planned. Victoria walked toward me, the crowd watching. Silence spreading through the room as people sensed drama unfolding. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak to me, but far enough to maintain separation. Far enough to make it clear we weren't together, weren't united, weren't anything I thought we were. She held an envelope in her hand, expensive paper that matched the invitation. She extended it toward me with a smile that was all edges and no warmth, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice clear and strong and completely devoid of emotion. Said words that would replay in my mind for years afterward. Words that would haunt my dreams and poison my memories. Michael, thank you for coming. I'm glad you could make it to witness the opening of my firm. The first official act of Hayes Law Group, the first client we're serving, is handling my divorce from you. These are the papers. Sign them and leave. Your job here is done. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. A few people actually laughed. Laughed at my humiliation. Laughed at my shock. Laughed at my pain. And I stood there, holding the envelope that contained divorce papers. Holding the physical evidence that my marriage was over. That my wife had been planning this. Had set me up for public humiliation. Had invited me to her law firm opening specifically so she could destroy me in front of an audience. My hands shook as I processed what was happening. My mind struggled to catch up. Struggled to understand how I had gotten here, how I had missed this, how the woman I loved and trusted had turned into this stranger with cruel eyes who was divorcing me at her own party. Questions flooded my mind. Questions I wanted to shout, but couldn't seem to form into words. Questions about why, and how long she had been planning this, and what I had done to deserve this, and whether anything about our relationship had been real. But I didn't shout. Didn't demand answers. Didn't make a scene. Because even in my shock, and pain, and humiliation, my mind was working. It was calculating. It was understanding that Victoria wanted me to break down. Wanted me to beg, or cry, or make myself look even more pathetic in front of all these people. Wanted to cement her narrative that I was weak, was nothing, was just a test-run husband who had served his purpose and could now be discarded. And I decided in that moment that I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Wouldn't play the role she had scripted for me. I would walk out with whatever dignity I could salvage, and then I would respond in ways she hadn't anticipated. In ways that would show her that I was not weak, was not nothing. Was someone she would deeply regret underestimating. I looked at Victoria for a long moment. Looked at this woman I had loved and supported and believed in. This woman who had just publicly destroyed our marriage. And I felt something shift inside me. Felt the hurt begin to crystallize into something harder, and colder, and more useful. I took the envelope from her hand without opening it, without looking at the papers inside. And I spoke for the first and only time since entering the room. My voice was quiet, but steady. The voice of someone who was done. Who was finished. Who was already moving on in his mind. Consider it done. Then I turned and walked toward the elevator. Walked through a crowd that parted for me, whispers following in my wake. Walked with my head up, my shoulders back, refusing to show the devastation I felt inside. Refusing to give them the broken man they expected to see. The elevator ride down felt endless, those few seconds stretching into eternity. Only when the doors closed and I was alone did my careful composure crack. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes, taking deep, shuddering breaths, trying to hold myself together, trying not to fall apart in a building elevator where security cameras would capture my breakdown. I made it to my car. Sat in the driver's seat with the divorce envelope beside me. And I let myself feel it then. Let the wave of emotions crash over me, grief, and rage, and betrayal, and humiliation, all mixing together into something that hurt so badly I thought I might physically come apart. But I didn't fall apart. Didn't sit in that parking lot crying until security asked me to leave. Because I had learned long ago that emotions were temporary, but actions were permanent. That feelings needed to be felt, but then they needed to be channeled into something productive, something useful, something that would change my situation rather than just expressing my pain. I pulled out my phone with hands that still shook slightly. And I started making calls. Started setting in motion a plan that was forming in my mind. A plan that would show Victoria exactly what she had done. Exactly what she had thrown away. Exactly how badly she had miscalculated in thinking I would just sign papers and disappear quietly. My first call was to Richard, my lawyer. He'd handled my business contracts and property purchases for years. I woke him on a Saturday evening, apologizing for the intrusion, but saying it was an emergency. I explained the situation quickly, asking Richard what I needed to do immediately to protect myself, to stop the bleeding, to prepare for what was coming. Richard was shocked. He'd met Victoria multiple times and considered her a friend. But he switched quickly into professional mode. Told me not to sign anything without him reviewing it. Told me to document everything. Told me to start gathering financial records and evidence of what I had contributed to the marriage. Told me to cut off access to any joint accounts or credit cards immediately. And told me to be very careful about what I said or did, because anything could be used against me in divorce proceedings. My second call was to Sarah, my accountant. She managed my business and personal finances and knew every dollar I had and where it was. I explained the situation, asking her to prepare a complete accounting of everything I had contributed to Victoria's law firm, every payment, transfer, investment, every dollar I had given her for her business. Asked Sarah to have it ready by Monday morning, because I was going to need it. Sarah was sympathetic but efficient. Told me she would pull all the records, create a detailed report, document the full extent of my financial contributions. And she also suggested I freeze any credit cards Victoria had access to and transfer money out of joint accounts into personal accounts before Victoria could drain them, because in divorce situations, it was common for spouses to try to grab whatever assets they could as quickly as possible. My third call was to my bank, speaking to the after-hours service. I requested immediate holds on joint accounts and credit cards, requested transfers of funds from joint accounts into my personal accounts. Protecting my money from being taken. Protecting assets I had earned and saved and built over years of work. The customer service representative was understanding. Said she had seen this situation before. Processed the request quickly. And within 20 minutes, my joint financial accounts were locked, and the money that was legally mine was secured where Victoria couldn't touch it. But I didn't stop there. Because protecting myself wasn't enough. Because I understood that Victoria had declared war. And in war, you didn't just defend. You attacked. You hit back in ways that hurt. In ways that showed your opponent they had made a terrible mistake. I pulled up the contract Victoria had signed when I invested in her law firm. The legal document that outlined my $20 million investment, and the terms of that investment. I reviewed it carefully, looking for clauses, and conditions, and ways out. And I found what I needed. A clause that stated I could withdraw my investment at any time within the first 6 months of operation if business conditions changed significantly, or if the business relationship was compromised. The firm had officially opened tonight, which meant we were definitely within the first 6 months. And the business relationship was certainly compromised, given that Victoria had just served me divorce papers at the opening party. Which meant I had legal grounds to pull my money. To withdraw my $20 million investment. To remove the foundation she had built her firm on. I called Richard back, asked him to review the contract, asked if I was reading it correctly. And Richard confirmed that yes, I absolutely could withdraw my investment under these circumstances. That the contract Victoria had signed gave me that right. And Richard also noted, with a hint of satisfaction in his voice, that without that $20 million, the firm would almost certainly collapse immediately. That Victoria had spent most of it already on office space, and hiring, and equipment, and startup costs. That she would be left with a firm she couldn't afford to operate, and debts she couldn't afford to pay. I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. The first positive emotion I had felt since walking into that party. Because I realized I held more power than Victoria had calculated. I held the ability to destroy what she had built, just as thoroughly as she had tried to destroy me. I composed an email to Victoria and to the law firm she had supposedly started. An email that was professionally worded and legally sound, citing the contract clause and the compromised business relationship, and officially notifying her that I was withdrawing my $20 million investment effective immediately. That any funds remaining from my investment should be returned within 30 days as the contract specified, and that I expected a full accounting of how my money had been spent. I copied Richard on the email and Sarah on the email, making sure there were witnesses to my notification, making sure the documentation was solid. And then I hit send. And watched the email disappear into the void, knowing it would land like a bomb. Knowing it would destroy everything Victoria thought she had accomplished. Then I made more calls. Calls to the party planner I knew Victoria had hired, because I had seen the invoice. Calls to the catering company. Calls to the office furniture supplier. Calls to every vendor I could identify that Victoria had contracted with for the firm. And I canceled every payment I had authorized. Stopped every check that hadn't cleared. Invoked clauses in contracts that allowed me to withdraw as the financial guarantor. Systematically dismantling the financial foundation of Hayes Law Group with the same methodical precision I had used to build my own businesses. With each call, with each cancellation, with each withdrawal, I felt lighter. Felt the humiliation and hurt transforming into something else. Something like justice. Something like revenge. And I understood that this was my response to being called a test-run husband. This was my response to being publicly humiliated. This was my response to having my love, and trust, and support thrown back in my face like trash. I spent 3 hours in my car in that parking lot, making calls, and sending emails, and canceling contracts. 3 hours systematically destroying what Victoria had built on my money. And when I was finally done, when every payment was stopped, and every contract was cancelled, and every dollar was secured or withdrawn, I started my car and drove home through the dark streets. Feeling exhausted, but also feeling satisfied. Feeling like I had fought back. Like I had shown Victoria that I wasn't weak, wasn't nothing. Wasn't someone who could be discarded without consequences. I went home to the house we had bought together, the house that was in both our names, but that I had paid for entirely. And I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark living room, waiting. Knowing that soon my phone would start ringing. Knowing that Victoria would realize what I had done. Knowing that she was about to understand exactly what she had lost. I sat in the dark living room for approximately 23 minutes before my phone started buzzing, vibrating on the coffee table with increasing urgency, the screen lighting up with incoming calls and texts that started as a trickle and quickly became a flood. I picked up the phone and watched notifications pile up. Call after call from Victoria. From numbers I didn't recognize that were probably people at the party. From Richard, my lawyer. From Sarah, my accountant. From vendors and companies and individuals who were all suddenly realizing that the money they expected was gone, that the checks they counted on were cancelled, that the foundation of Hayes Law Group had just evaporated. I didn't answer any of the calls, just watched them accumulate. Watched the missed call counter climb. Watched Victoria's name appear over and over and over again with a persistence that would have been flattering if the circumstances were different. If she was calling because she loved me instead of because she needed me. If she was reaching out as a wife instead of as someone panicking about money. The texts that came through were increasingly desperate. Starting with confusion, asking what was happening with the payments and the investments. Progressing to anger, demanding I fix whatever mistake had been made. And eventually deteriorating into panic, begging me to call back, saying they needed to talk, saying there had been a misunderstanding, saying things that made it clear Victoria had realized the magnitude of what I had done. The calls continued for hours, the number climbing higher and higher. I left my phone on the table and went upstairs to pack Victoria's things. Methodically going through closets and drawers and pulling out everything that belonged to her. Folding clothes, boxing shoes, gathering jewelry and cosmetics and all the possessions she had accumulated during our marriage. I worked steadily and without emotion, treating it like any other task that needed completing. And by 3 a.m., I had packed 27 boxes and 6 suitcases with Victoria's belongings. Had stacked them neatly in the garage. Had removed every trace of her from our bedroom and bathroom and closet. Had erased her presence from my space. Then I changed the locks on all the doors. A simple task that took 20 minutes with a screwdriver and lock sets I had on hand, because I owned rental properties and changed locks regularly. And when I was done, Victoria would not be able to walk into this house without my permission. Would not have access to what was mine. Would learn that her actions had consequences that extended beyond money. I went back to my phone and saw the missed call counter had climbed to 456 calls. An absurd number that represented roughly 1 call every few minutes for the past 6 hours. Representing desperation beyond anything I had ever witnessed. And still I didn't answer. Didn't respond. Let the calls and texts pile up like evidence of exactly how badly Victoria needed what I had provided, exactly how much power I had held all along without realizing it. At 4:30 in the morning, just as dawn was beginning to hint at its arrival, I heard a car pull into my driveway with a speed that suggested urgency. Heard a car door slam and footsteps running to the front door, and then pounding on that door, fist hitting wood with force that made the door shudder. And I knew without looking that Victoria had come. That she had finally left her law firm opening party, or wherever she had been, and had come here to confront me, to demand answers, to try to fix what I had broken. I walked to the door slowly, not hurrying, making her wait, making her understand that I controlled this interaction now. When I finally opened the door, I found Victoria standing on my porch, looking nothing like the composed, cruel woman who had handed me divorce papers. Looking instead like someone who had spent the night crying and panicking. Her makeup smeared, her expensive dress wrinkled, her hair disheveled. And when she saw me, she started talking immediately, words tumbling out in a rush, saying there had been a terrible misunderstanding, saying she hadn't meant what happened at the party. Saying it was all a joke that went too far, saying we could work this out, saying she loved me, saying every word I had wanted to hear for years. But none of them landed, because they were too late. Were coming from the wrong motivation. Were transparently about money instead of love. I let her talk until she ran out of words. Let her exhaust herself with explanations and justifications and pleas. And then I responded with a calmness that was more devastating than anger would have been. I told her that I had received her divorce papers and would be happy to sign them. That I had withdrawn my investment from her law firm, as was my legal right under the contract she had signed. That I had cancelled all payments and contracts for which I was financially responsible, because I was no longer willing to fund her business. That I had packed her belongings and they were in the garage, and she was welcome to take them. And that she was no longer welcome in my house, as I had changed the locks, and she should make arrangements to stay elsewhere going forward. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions as I spoke: shock, and disbelief, and anger, and desperation. She tried to push past me into the house, but I blocked her, held firm, told her this was no longer her home. Told her she had made her choice when she handed me divorce papers in front of a room full of people. Told her she couldn't unmake that choice just because the consequences were worse than she expected. She started crying then, real tears streaming down her face. And she tried a different approach. Tried to touch me, tried to appeal to our history. Said she had made a mistake, said she was under a lot of stress, said her colleagues had pressured her into making a dramatic statement to establish her independence. Said she hadn't thought it through, said she would do anything to fix this. I felt nothing watching her cry. Felt no sympathy or softness or temptation to forgive. Because I understood that these were the tears of someone who had lost access to my money, not of someone who had lost me. These were the tears of someone facing consequences, not of someone facing genuine remorse. I told Victoria that if she wanted to discuss the divorce, she could contact me through Richard, my lawyer, that I would not be communicating with her directly. That whatever they needed to resolve would be resolved through legal channels. And I suggested she hire a lawyer to represent her interests, because Hayes Law Group clearly couldn't do it, given that the firm no longer had funding and would probably be dissolved within days. Victoria's tears stopped abruptly at that, replaced by anger, her face transforming into something ugly. She started yelling at me. Called me petty and vindictive and cruel. Said I was destroying her career out of spite. Said I was proving I never really loved her. Said real men didn't abandon their wives just because of a mistake. Said I was nothing without her anyway, just a kid from Millbrook who got lucky with some real estate deals, and she had been doing me a favor by staying with him as long as she had, giving him legitimacy and class and access to a world he would never have reached without her. Her words were meant to hurt. Were meant to make me doubt myself. Were the last weapons she had left. But they bounced off me harmlessly, because I knew they weren't true. Knew my success had nothing to do with her. Knew I had built everything myself. And her attempt to claim credit for my achievements just confirmed what I was already learning, that I had never really known Victoria at all, had been in love with a performance rather than a person. I told Victoria calmly that she needed to leave, that her things were packed and in the garage, and she should collect them and go. And when she refused, when she planted herself on my porch and said she wasn't leaving until I fixed this, I pulled out my phone and started dialing the police, explaining that I would report trespassing if she didn't leave voluntarily. Victoria looked shocked that I would actually call the police on her. Looked like she couldn't believe I was serious. But when the dispatcher answered and I started providing my address, Victoria finally moved. Finally walked to the garage and started loading boxes and suitcases into her car, making multiple trips and shooting me furious looks each time. And I watched her passively, helping with nothing, saying nothing, just waiting for her to finish and leave. On her final trip, she stopped in front of me and tried one more time, her voice desperate and raw. Asked me how I could do this to her, how I could destroy everything she had worked for. Didn't I understand she had nothing without the firm, nowhere to go, no way to pay for the office space or the employees or any of it? Didn't I care what happened to her at all? I looked at my wife. This woman who had called me a test-run husband. This woman who had planned my humiliation as entertainment for her colleagues. This woman who had turned their marriage into a transaction she was now canceling. And I told her the truth. Told her that she should have thought about consequences before handing me divorce papers at her law firm opening. Should have considered what she was throwing away before she threw it. Should have remembered that the money she spent so freely came from somewhere. Came from someone. Came from me. And now she would learn what life was like without it. Victoria left as the sun was rising. Her car packed with boxes, her face streaked with mascara. I closed my door and locked it, and went upstairs to my bedroom, that no longer held any trace of her. I lay down on my bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. I had gone to a party expecting to celebrate my wife's success and had returned home having destroyed that success. Had gone from happily married to separated and heading for divorce. Had gone from trusting and supportive husband to betrayed and vengeful ex. And the speed of the transformation left me feeling disoriented, like I had fallen through a trapdoor into a different life. My phone continued buzzing with calls and messages, but I ignored it. I needed silence. Needed time to think. Needed to figure out what came next. Because while I had responded decisively in the moment, I hadn't really planned beyond that. Hadn't thought about what my life would look like going forward. Hadn't imagined a future that didn't include Victoria, because even in my worst moments, I had believed we would work through anything. Sleep wouldn't come despite my exhaustion, my mind too active, too loud. Replaying the scene at the law firm, opening over and over, analyzing every detail, trying to understand how I had missed the signs, how I had been so blind to what Victoria was planning, how she had managed to make me believe everything was fine when she was actually preparing to publicly humiliate and divorce me. By Monday morning, I was exhausted but focused. I had spent the weekend piecing together information, making more calls, meeting with Richard, my lawyer, to go over the divorce papers and my rights and my strategy. Meeting with Sarah, my accountant, to review the accounting of money I had given Victoria, and how much could potentially be recovered. And beginning to understand the full scope of what had happened. Victoria's divorce papers were aggressive, asking for half of everything I owned, including my real estate portfolio and my businesses. Claiming that she had supported my career and deserved to share in my success, claiming that they had been partners in every sense, and she had contributed equally, even if not financially. Richard said this was going to be a fight. Was going to be expensive and time-consuming and ugly. But he also said I had strong positions. Had proof of what I had built before the marriage, and what I had built during the marriage with my own money and effort. Had documentation that Victoria's career and firm were funded entirely by me. And had the trump card of having withdrawn my investment, which meant Victoria couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle, even if she wanted one. Sarah's accounting was revealing and disturbing, showing that I had given Victoria $20 million for her law firm over the course of a year, money transferred in chunks as she claimed to need it for various expenses. But Sarah had done some investigating and had discovered that Hayes Law Group's actual expenses were maybe $12 million, which meant $8 million was unaccounted for. Had gone somewhere other than the business. And Sarah suggested I demand a full accounting and consider whether Victoria had committed fraud or embezzlement. But more disturbing than missing money was information that started coming to me from unexpected sources, former colleagues and friends who had apparently been at the law firm opening party and had witnessed my humiliation, and who now felt guilty enough to reach out to tell me things they thought I should know, to share truths that Victoria had kept hidden. The first call came from a woman named Jennifer who worked at the same law firm Victoria had worked at before starting her own practice. Jennifer was crying as she explained that she had never liked what Victoria was doing but hadn't felt like it was her place to interfere. Hadn't wanted to get involved in someone else's marriage. But after seeing what happened Saturday night, she couldn't stay silent anymore. Jennifer told me that Victoria had been having an affair for at least 6 months, maybe longer, with another lawyer named Harrison Prescott, who was a partner at a competing firm. Everyone at Victoria's old firm knew about it. Had seen them together at legal conferences and bar association events. Had heard Victoria talking about Harrison like he was her real partner, while Michael was just the money guy. Just the bank that funded her life, just the test-run husband she was using until she could afford to upgrade. Jennifer said Victoria and Harrison had apparently planned to merge their practices once Victoria's firm was established. Had planned to become a power couple in the legal world. And Harrison came from old money and connections, and was exactly the kind of man Victoria had always wanted. Someone who could give her the social status and professional legitimacy she craved. And I had apparently been a stepping stone. Someone useful until someone better came along. I listened to Jennifer with a coldness spreading through my chest, a numbness that was probably my mind's way of protecting me from the full impact of what I was learning. I thanked her for telling me, and hung up, and sat very still, trying to absorb this information. Victoria had been cheating on me. Had been planning to leave me. Had used me for my money and my support while building a life that didn't include me. And the test-run husband comment wasn't just a cruel joke, but an actual description of how she saw me. How she had always seen me. As temporary. As practice. As something to use and discard when something better appeared. More calls came throughout the day, more people who had been at the party, or who knew Victoria or who felt compelled to share what they knew. And a picture emerged that was consistent and devastating. Victoria had been telling people for months that she was only staying with Michael until her firm was established. That he was a good provider, but not the kind of man she wanted long-term. That he was too blue-collar and too focused on money, and not sophisticated enough for the world she was entering. And she had apparently laughed about him with colleagues, had made jokes about his background, and his manners, and his lack of polish. Had presented him as an embarrassment she was stuck with temporarily. Every revelation felt like a knife to my chest. Every piece of information confirming that my marriage had been a lie. That the woman I loved had never existed. That I had been played more completely than I could have imagined. Richard called with more information that had legal implications, having done some investigating of his own through connections in the legal community. And what he learned was explosive. Harrison Prescott, Victoria's affair partner, had apparently also invested in Hayes Law Group, had put in $5 million and was planning to merge his practice with Victoria's once her firm was established. And Harrison's money explained some of the discrepancy in Victoria's expenses. Explained where some of my investment had actually gone. Victoria had been using my money to pay for office space and staff, while using Harrison's money, and possibly my money, for personal expenses, for the lifestyle she wanted to project, for the apartment she had apparently rented where she and Harrison spent time together. Richard explained that this information was useful for the divorce, showed that Victoria had been fraudulent and unfaithful and was not entitled to the spousal support she was demanding. But Richard also warned that Harrison Prescott came from a powerful family with connections throughout the legal system. That fighting them would be difficult. That Victoria now had access to resources I couldn't match in terms of legal influence and social pressure. I listened to this warning and felt anger replace the numbness. Felt my determination harden into something unbreakable, because I understood that Victoria and Harrison thought they could destroy me. Thought my blue-collar background meant I would be easy to beat. Thought my lack of connections and pedigree meant I was vulnerable. And I decided right then that I would prove them wrong. Would show them that money and determination could beat connections and privilege. Would make them regret underestimating the kid from Millbrook, who had built an empire from nothing. The week following the law firm opening was chaotic in ways I hadn't anticipated, with consequences rippling out from my decisions in patterns I couldn't have predicted. Hayes Law Group collapsed within 72 hours of my investment withdrawal. Unable to pay rent or staff or vendors, with employees quitting and creditors calling, and the office space being reclaimed by the landlord. Victoria's dream firm existed for exactly 1 weekend before imploding spectacularly. The legal community was apparently talking about nothing else. The story of the law firm opening, and the divorce papers, and the investment withdrawal spreading like wildfire. And opinions were divided. Some people thought I was vindictive and cruel for destroying Victoria's career, while others thought Victoria got exactly what she deserved for humiliating her husband publicly. I didn't care what people thought, wasn't interested in public opinion or reputation management, was focused entirely on protecting myself and my assets and moving forward with my life. Victoria tried repeatedly to contact me, leaving hundreds of voicemails that progressed from angry to pleading to threatening. But I never responded. Communicated only through Richard. Let my lawyer handle every interaction, maintained boundaries that Victoria kept trying to cross. She hired a lawyer eventually, presumably funded by Harrison Prescott since she had no money of her own, and the divorce proceedings began in earnest with motions and counter-motions and demands and refusals, with both sides digging in for what was clearly going to be a protracted battle. 3 weeks after the law firm opening disaster, Sarah, the accountant, called me with urgency in her voice. Told me she had found something important, something that changed everything, and she needed to meet with me and Richard immediately. We convened at Richard's office that afternoon, and Sarah laid out documents and spreadsheets and bank statements that she had obtained through legal channels and through her own investigative work. And what she had discovered was worse than I had imagined. And also better for my legal position. Sarah had traced my $20 million investment through Victoria's accounts and had discovered that of that $20 million, only $9 million had actually gone to legitimate business expenses for Hayes Law Group, while $11 million had been diverted to other accounts. To personal spending. To investments in properties that were titled only in Victoria's name. To transfers that supported Harrison Prescott's business ventures. To a lifestyle that was far more expensive than I had realized. Victoria had apparently been living a completely separate life funded by my money. Had been buying designer clothes and expensive jewelry, and had purchased a luxury condo downtown that I knew nothing about. Had been taking trips with Harrison that she claimed were for legal conferences, but were actually vacations. Had been spending my money to build a life with another man while pretending everything was fine at home. Sarah explained that this level of deception and financial fraud gave me significant leverage in the divorce. That Victoria had essentially stolen from me. Had misappropriated funds that were supposed to be business investments for personal use. And that I could potentially file criminal charges in addition to civil claims. Could have Victoria prosecuted for fraud and embezzlement if I chose to pursue that route. Richard agreed. Said this discovery changed our entire strategy. Said we could now go on offense instead of just defense. Could demand full restitution plus damages plus legal fees. Could make Victoria's life extremely difficult unless she agreed to a settlement that was favorable to me. Accepting minimal spousal support or property division. Essentially walking away with nothing. I listened to all of this with a satisfaction that was cold and calculated. Understanding that I now held all the cards. That Victoria had overplayed her hand and had been sloppy in her deception, and her sloppiness had given me the weapon I needed to end this on my terms. But I also felt something like sadness beneath the satisfaction. Sadness that my marriage had come to this. That the woman I loved had turned out to be a fraud. That years of my life had been built on lies. And I found myself grieving not for Victoria as she actually was, but for Victoria as I had believed her to be. For the partnership I thought we had. For the future I had imagined that would never exist. Richard reached out to Victoria's lawyer with our findings, laying out the evidence of financial fraud and the potential criminal charges, making it clear that I was prepared to pursue every legal avenue available unless Victoria agreed to dissolve the marriage quickly and quietly, keeping nothing except what she had brought into the marriage, which was essentially nothing. Victoria's lawyer tried to bluff initially, claimed the evidence was circumstantial and wouldn't hold up in court. Claimed Victoria had every right to spend marital funds however she chose. But Richard called the bluff. Filed preliminary motions with the court, including the detailed accounting and bank records. And within 48 hours, Victoria's lawyer was calling to negotiate, suddenly much more reasonable, suddenly willing to discuss settlement terms. The negotiations were brutal and one-sided, with me holding all the leverage and using it ruthlessly. And within 2 weeks, we had reached an agreement. Victoria would waive all claims to my properties and businesses and investments. Would accept zero spousal support. Would return what remained of the diverted $11 million, which was approximately $7 million after her spending spree. Would sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing her from discussing our marriage or the divorce publicly. And would admit no wrongdoing while receiving no criminal charges. It was an unconditional surrender dressed up as a settlement, and Victoria had no choice but to accept, because the alternative was criminal prosecution and public exposure of everything she had done. Professional disgrace that would prevent her from practicing law and social destruction that would cost her the life she had been trying to build. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in a courthouse conference room. Both parties present with their lawyers, but not speaking to each other, not making eye contact, treating it like a business transaction rather than the end of a marriage. Which was fitting, given that the marriage had apparently been a business transaction for Victoria all along. I signed the papers without emotion. Watched Victoria sign with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face and felt nothing except relief that it was over, that I could finally close this chapter and move forward, that I was free of someone who had never valued me as anything more than a resource to exploit. When we left the courthouse, Victoria tried one last time to approach me, tried to say something that might have been an apology, or an explanation or a final manipulation. But I walked past her without slowing, got in my car, and drove away without looking back. And that was the last time I saw Victoria Hayes in person, the last time I had to face the woman who had betrayed me so thoroughly. Richard called later to confirm that the settlement was recorded and official, that Victoria had 45 days to return the $7 million she owed, that the non-disclosure agreement was binding and enforceable, and that I was officially divorced, officially single, officially free to move on with my life however I chose. The weeks following the divorce were strange for me. Feeling simultaneously liberated and lost. Free from Victoria's presence, but uncertain about what came next. Successful in my revenge, but not particularly satisfied by it. Vindicated legally, but emotionally hollow. I threw myself into work with even more intensity than usual, buying 3 more properties in rapid succession, expanding my construction company into commercial projects, launching a new property management software company that I had been planning for months. Filling every hour with productivity and progress and achievement. Because empty hours led to thinking, and thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to pain I preferred to avoid. My friends and family were supportive, but didn't quite know what to say. Couldn't understand what I had been through, because most of them had never experienced betrayal at that level. Had never had someone they loved completely turn out to be a lie. And I found myself isolating, declining invitations, spending evenings alone in my house that felt too big and too quiet now that I was the only one in it. I went to therapy, recognizing that I needed help processing everything. Needed someone objective to help me sort through the emotions and the trauma and the questions about what I had missed and how I could trust anyone again. My therapist was helpful in providing coping strategies and perspective. But ultimately, I knew that healing would take time, would require patience with myself, would mean accepting that some scars were permanent, even if they eventually stopped hurting. 6 months after the divorce, I received a check from Victoria's lawyer for $7 million. The full amount she owed for the diverted funds. And attached to the check was a note in Victoria's handwriting. The first direct communication we had had since the courthouse. And the note said simply, "You were right to walk away. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find someone who deserves you." I read the note 3 times, trying to decode its meaning, trying to determine if it was genuine remorse or another manipulation, trying to decide if Victoria had actually learned something or was just sorry she got caught. Ultimately, I decided it didn't matter. That whatever Victoria felt or didn't feel was her problem, not mine. That her apology didn't change what had happened and didn't heal what she had broken. And I put the check in the bank and threw the note away. And decided that was the end. That I wouldn't think about Victoria Hayes anymore. Wouldn't give her any more space in my mind, or my life. Would treat her as a closed chapter, a painful lesson, a cautionary tale about trust and love and the danger of seeing what you want to see instead of what's actually there. I was 30 years old, successful beyond my wildest childhood dreams, financially secure for life if I never worked another day. But I was also divorced and betrayed, and carrying wounds that I suspected would never fully heal. And I had to figure out how to move forward from here. How to build a life that felt meaningful when the future I had planned was no longer possible. How to trust anyone again when trust had been so thoroughly weaponized against me. Then, 8 months after the divorce, something completely unexpected happened. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, and my doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. Early enough that I was still in workout clothes, having just finished a run. I wasn't expecting anyone, didn't have appointments or deliveries scheduled, so the bell ringing was puzzling and slightly annoying. I walked to the door, debating whether to answer, not in the mood for solicitors or lost neighbors. But something made me look through the peephole, and what I saw made my breath catch. Standing on my porch was a woman I had never seen before, probably in her early 60s, well dressed in a way that suggested money and class. Holding a folder and looking nervous but determined. And there was something about her that seemed important. Seemed like this wasn't a random visit, but something I needed to pay attention to. I opened the door, and the woman's face flooded with relief, like she had been afraid I wouldn't answer. She introduced herself as Margaret Caldwell, said she was sorry to show up unannounced but she had something important to tell me. Something she had been debating for months whether to share. And she had finally decided I deserved to know the truth. Deserved to understand what had really happened with Victoria. Deserved information that would change how I saw everything. I invited Margaret inside, curiosity overriding caution. I made coffee while she settled in my living room, and then I sat down and asked her to explain who she was and why she was here and what truths she was talking about. Margaret took a deep breath and began a story that I hadn't seen coming. A story that added new dimensions to everything I thought I understood. And I listened with growing astonishment as she explained that she was Harrison Prescott's mother. That Harrison was her only child and she loved him, but that didn't mean she approved of everything he did. And what he had done to me was wrong, was manipulative and cruel, and she couldn't stay silent anymore. Margaret explained that Harrison had targeted Victoria deliberately. Had researched successful young lawyers and had identified Victoria as someone ambitious and vulnerable to his particular kind of manipulation. Someone who wanted status and access to the world Harrison represented. Someone who could be convinced to betray her husband if the right incentives were offered. Harrison had apparently made Victoria a project. Had seduced her over months. Had filled her head with ideas about what her life could be if she was with someone from his world instead of someone from my world. Had convinced her that I was holding her back, was beneath her, was something to be embarrassed about rather than proud of. And Harrison had specifically suggested the law firm opening humiliation as a way to assert her independence and make a clean break. I felt rage building as Margaret talked. Rage at Harrison for orchestrating this, at Victoria for going along with it, at myself for being blind to all of it. But Margaret wasn't finished, had more to tell me, and what came next was even worse. Margaret explained that Harrison was a con artist. Had been running similar schemes for years, targeting women who had access to money or were about to have access to money. Seducing them and manipulating them and convincing them to invest in his ventures or give him control of their assets, and then disappearing once the money was gone, leaving them financially and emotionally destroyed. Harrison had apparently done this to at least 4 women that Margaret knew of, possibly more. And she had tried to stop him. Had tried to get him help. Had threatened to cut off his trust fund. But Harrison was a sociopath, or something close to it. Charming and convincing and completely without conscience. And he always managed to talk his way out of consequences. Margaret said that Harrison had targeted Victoria specifically because she had access to my money. Had researched me and known I was a successful investor with significant resources. And the plan had been for Victoria to take half of my assets in the divorce, merge her law firm with Harrison's practice, and essentially transfer my wealth to them. And then Harrison would have eventually drained that wealth and moved on to his next target, leaving Victoria with nothing, just like he left all the others with nothing. Margaret's voice shook as she explained why she was telling me this. Said that she had watched Harrison destroy Victoria over the past months. Had watched Victoria realize she had been manipulated and used. Had watched her lose everything, including her career and her reputation and the settlement money that Harrison had convinced her to invest in ventures that promptly failed or never existed at all. And Victoria was now essentially homeless, living with her mother, unable to find work in the legal field because word had spread about the fraud and the scandal. broken in ways Margaret wasn't sure she could recover from. Margaret said she wasn't excusing what Victoria had done, wasn't suggesting I should forgive her or help her, but she wanted me to understand that Victoria had been a victim, too. Had been targeted by someone expert at manipulation. Had been fed a fantasy that seemed real until it was too late. And the person ultimately responsible was Harrison. Was Margaret's own son. And she was ashamed of what he had done, and wanted to make sure I knew the full story. Knew that I hadn't missed obvious signs because there weren't obvious signs. That I had been dealing with a professional con artist operating through Victoria as a proxy. Margaret opened the folder she had brought and pulled out documents, bank records, emails, and text messages between Harrison and Victoria that she had obtained through methods she didn't explain. Evidence that supported everything she was saying. Evidence that showed Harrison calculating every move and Victoria gradually falling under his influence, and me being discussed as a resource to exploit rather than a person with feelings. I read through the documents feeling like I was seeing my marriage from a completely different angle. Understanding now that I hadn't just married the wrong person, but had been targeted, had been selected as a mark, had been the victim of a long-term con that I never suspected was happening. Part of me wanted to rage at Margaret, wanted to blame her for raising a monster, wanted to say that this information changed nothing because Victoria had still made choices, had still humiliated me, had still stolen from me. But another part of me felt something like closure. Understanding finally why it had happened, why Victoria had changed or had revealed who she really was, why nothing I did or said or gave had been enough, because I was never the point. I was just a means to an end in someone else's scheme. I asked Margaret what she wanted from me, why she had really come, whether this was some attempt to prevent me from pursuing further legal action against Harrison. And Margaret surprised me by saying she wanted nothing, expected nothing, just felt I deserved truth. Deserved to know I hadn't failed or missed something or been inadequate, that I had simply been unlucky enough to cross paths with Harrison, who was very good at what he did. And she hoped this information would help me move forward, would help me trust again someday, would prevent me from blaming myself for something that wasn't my fault. She stood to leave, and I walked her to the door. Thanked her for coming, even though I wasn't sure how I felt about anything she had told me. And Margaret paused at the threshold and said one more thing. Victoria had asked her to tell me something if she ever got the chance. Asked her to tell me that loving me had been the only real thing in our marriage. That everything else had been Harrison's poison, but her feelings for Michael had been genuine. And she was sorry. Was so sorry for not being strong enough to resist the manipulation, for believing Harrison's lies, for destroying the one good thing in her life. And she understood if Michael hated her, and she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted him to know that he had been loved, even if poorly, even if not enough, even if ultimately betrayed. Margaret left, and I closed the door and stood in my entryway, trying to process this new information, trying to integrate it with everything I thought I knew, trying to decide if it changed anything fundamental, or just added context to the same painful story. I spent the day reviewing the documents Margaret had left, seeing my marriage laid out in emails and texts and bank transfers, seeing Harrison's manipulation and Victoria's gradual corruption, and my own presence as a background figure. Someone discussed but not really considered. Someone's husband but not really someone's partner. And the evidence supported Margaret's story completely. Showed that Victoria had been targeted and manipulated, and eventually destroyed by someone who did this professionally, who had practice and skill and no conscience. I didn't know what to do with this information. Didn't know if it made things better or worse. Didn't know if Victoria deserving some sympathy changed how I felt about what had happened to me. And I realized that healing wasn't linear. Wasn't something you achieved and then you were done, but was something you worked at constantly, adjusting and readjusting your understanding, accepting new information, and integrating it without letting it destroy the progress you had made. I decided finally that Margaret's revelation didn't change my decisions and didn't make me regret my actions, because Victoria had still made choices regardless of Harrison's influence. Had still participated in the humiliation and the fraud and the betrayal. But it did help me understand that the situation had been more complex than I realized. That Victoria wasn't simply evil or heartless, but was herself a victim of someone worse. And that understanding allowed me to release some of the anger I had been carrying. To forgive not what she did but the person she was. To accept that people were complicated and situations were messy and sometimes there were no clear villains and heroes, just people making choices and dealing with consequences. Life continued for me with the strange quality of moving forward while feeling stuck. Of achieving success after success in business while feeling empty in the places that mattered. Of being surrounded by people but feeling fundamentally alone. And I existed in this state for more than a year after Margaret's visit. Functional but not fully alive. Successful but not satisfied. Healing but not healed. My businesses thrived. My real estate portfolio expanded to 37 properties. My construction company landed major commercial projects. My property management software company was acquired by a larger tech firm for a sum that added another $8 million to my net worth. And by the time I was 32 years old, my net worth exceeded $40 million, putting me firmly in the category of wealthy by anyone's measure. But the wealth felt hollow. Felt like numbers on a screen rather than security or freedom. And I found myself thinking often about my younger self, about the kid collecting cans in Millbrook, who thought money would solve everything, would make him happy. And I wished I could tell that kid that money solved problems but created others. That success didn't equal satisfaction. That the things you thought you wanted weren't always the things you needed. My therapist suggested I try dating again. Said I had done the work of processing the trauma and understanding the betrayal and forgiving myself for missing signs I couldn't have seen. And it was time to take the risk of letting someone in again. Time to accept that Victoria's betrayal didn't mean everyone would betray me. That my judgment wasn't fundamentally broken just because one person had fooled me. That I deserved companionship and love and the chance to build something real with someone trustworthy. I was resistant initially. Felt too raw and too cautious and too aware of how badly things could go. But eventually I agreed to try. Started going on dates arranged by friends or through apps, meeting women over coffee or dinner and making awkward conversation and trying to feel something, trying to find a connection, trying to imagine a future with someone new. The dates were universally disappointing. Not because the women weren't nice or attractive or interesting, but because I found myself comparing everyone to Victoria. Or more accurately, comparing everyone to my memory of Victoria before I knew what she really was. And nobody measured up to the fantasy I had believed in. Nobody generated the excitement and certainty I had felt with her. And I started to worry that Victoria had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed, that my ability to love and trust was permanently damaged. That I was destined to be alone, not by choice, but by emotional incapacity. Then I met Elena Rodriguez at a real estate investor conference. Not looking for romance, but for business opportunities. I was attending a seminar on commercial property development and sitting next to a woman who asked intelligent questions and took detailed notes, and clearly knew what she was doing. When the seminar ended, we started talking about the presentation and realized we had similar investment philosophies and complementary skill sets. We exchanged business cards and agreed to get coffee to discuss potential collaboration. That coffee meeting turned into a 3-hour conversation about real estate and business and life philosophies. And I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. Found myself interested and engaged and not thinking about Victoria at all. And when we parted ways, I realized I hoped I would see Elena again. Hoped that coffee turned into another meeting. Hoped that business interest was, or could become, personal interest. Elena was different from Victoria in fundamental ways. She was quiet where Victoria had been loud. Was thoughtful where Victoria had been impulsive. Was genuine where Victoria had been performative. And she had a calmness and a groundedness that I found incredibly appealing. Found myself drawn to, even though it was nothing like the electric intensity one had felt with Victoria. We met several more times, ostensibly to discuss business, and our conversations gradually shifted from entirely professional to more personal, sharing our histories and our goals and our fears. And I found myself telling Elena about Victoria and the betrayal and the divorce, something I hadn't planned to share, but felt safe sharing with her. And Elena listened without judgment and without pity. Told me her own story of a failed engagement to someone who had wanted her money and not her. And we recognized in each other the specific kind of wounded that comes from being valued for the wrong reasons. The relationship developed slowly. Both of us cautious and careful. Both carrying scars, but finding in each other, for the first time in a long time, the possibility of real healing, and maybe, just maybe, something truly real. It's been a long journey, filled with incredible highs and devastating lows. I learned that building an empire doesn't guarantee happiness, and that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. But I also learned resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself, and that even after the deepest hurt, there's always a chance for something new. I'm still figuring things out, still putting the pieces back together, but I'm doing it with clear eyes now. So tell me, after hearing all this, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced a betrayal that shook your world to its core? I really want to know what you think in the comments below.